Testing 1 2 3. Testing 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 1 2 3.
Testing, testing. Okay. On, on.
Ready.
Good to go. Got a new board reporter today.
Yes, see. Good morning. I'm David Barish, Chairman of the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. Before we begin, I just ask everyone to put their various electronic devices on silent so it doesn't disrupt things. Today, have with us George Augusto, representing Russell Redding, Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, Jen Langen, representing Tim Reese, the State Treasurer, and Bob Coyne, representing Secretary of Revenue Eileen McNulty. Thank you all for coming. Quorum of the board being present, I'll call today's proceedings to order. First order of business, the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we begin today, we have several presentations of service awards for gaming employees.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. It's always an enjoyable task to put on the wireless microphone and have undivided attention. But we are continuing a tradition that we began over a year ago of recognizing and congratulating in a public way employees who have reached that very significant milestone of 10 years of service with the Gaming Control Board. So with the assistance of Human Resource Specialist Joe Bott, we're going to recognize 7 employees this morning. So Wes and everybody, if you could all come on up here front and center. Neil, go right there we go. Okay, fantastic. So our first honoree this morning is Wes Davenport. Wes was hired on October 14th of 2006 as a licensing analyst within the Bureau of Licensing's Gaming Service Provider Unit. Wes continues to do a great job for the agency in that position today. Wes, congratulations and thank you for your work. Next up is Salim Jackson. Salim had the longest trip to get here today. Thank you very much for driving from the Pittsburgh area. Salim was hired on November 13th of 2006 as a licensing analyst within the Bureau of Licensing here in Harrisburg. In May of 2010, Salim decided to relocate to the Pittsburgh area to become a casino compliance representative with our Bureau of Casino Compliance. And then in 2015, Salim was promoted to supervisor of the Casino Compliance Unit assigned to the Rivers Casino. Congratulations, Salim. Thank you very much for your work. Rita Spittler is someone that hopefully we all recognize. She was hired on December 21st of 2006 as the agency's receptionist, the position that she holds today. We are all very appreciative of Rita's smile that greets us every morning as we enter the office to begin our workday. Thank you for your smile and for your work. Next we have Patty Gustafson. Patty was hired on December 26th, 2006 as a gaming compliance examiner within the Bureau of Gaming Operations. Patty has the distinction of being one of the few employees hired in 2005-2006 who had casino experience. And that proved very helpful. And since 2007, Patty has served our agency as compliance manager. Congratulations and thank you, Patty. Neil Hittinger. Neil was hired on January the 8th of 2007 as a law clerk for the Office of Hearings and Appeals. Neil soon became an assistant chief counsel within the Office of Chief Counsel, and today Neil holds the position of senior counsel. We really don't remember when you were a law clerk, Neil. It was so long ago. But congratulations and thank you for your work. So we were hoping to have Tanya Miller here with us, our HR specialist. I think the weather conditions on the road prevented her from coming in. But Tanya and Lindsley Dino and Angela DeSantis all started on the same day. They started on January 13th of 2007. I'm sure you guys remember being together and being oriented. Lindsley was hired on January 13th of 2007 as a licensing analyst for the Employee Permitting Unit within the Bureau of Licensing. In April of last year, Lindsley became an investigative analyst for the Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement. Congratulations, Lindsley, and thank you for your work. And Angela DeSantis, our last honoree this morning, she was also hired on January 13th of 2007 as a licensing technician in the Special Services Unit within the Bureau of Licensing. Angela accepted the responsibilities of Executive Secretary and was promoted into that position within the Bureau of Licensing in July of 2014, the position that she currently holds. Angela, congratulations and thank you for your work. So let's give everybody a hand of applause. Okay, thank you all.
By way of announcements, the board held an executive session yesterday, January 10th, to conduct quasi-judicial deliberations relating to matters the board is going to be considering today. Next, we have consideration of a motion to approve the minutes and transcripts of the November 16th meeting. May I have such a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the minutes and transcript of the November 16, 2016 meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Under new business, we will hear from our Executive Director, Kevin O'Toole, again.
For the Executive Director's report this morning, we have the Pennsylvania Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association here this morning for an item that our Director of Racetrack Operations, Kevin Kyle, will summarize.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. The Pennsylvania Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association, or PTHA, has requested approval of amendments to their Trainer's Retirement Plan, Employee Retirement Plan, and Health Benefit Plan. Under Section 1406 of the Act, approximately 4% of funding received from the Pennsylvania Racehorse Development Fund is required to be used to fund health insurance and pension benefits for members of the horsemen's organizations, their families, and their employees in accordance with the rules and eligibility requirements of each organization. Subsection F of Section 1406 of the Act requires that all health and pension benefit contracts be approved by the board. The PTHA represents owners and trainers who enter and race horses at Parks Racing. Representatives from the PTHA are present today and are here to address the amendments to the health and pension benefit plans with the board.
Before we proceed, could each of you stand up, identify yourself for the court reporter?
Yes.
We'd be happy to. Thank you, Kevin and Mr. Director. I'm Nancy Wash. I'm counsel to the Horsemen's Association, the PTHA, and I draft these plans. I get them approved by IRS when necessary and do other things related to the benefits for the Horsemen's Association.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Michael Bellezzi, B-A-L-L-E-Z-Z-I. I'm the Executive Director for the Pennsylvania Thoroughbred Horsemen Association.
Mr. Bellezzi,
Yes, sir.
would you please take the oath?
I do.
Thank you very much. You may proceed.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, members, as the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association, we represent the horsemen who race at Parks Racing. As a result of Act 71, we've developed a pension and health care plan for the trainers, owners, and the stable employees and the employees of the PTHA. We're asking today for several amendments, which Ms. Wash, as our counsel, will present to you in the request for the amendments. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, we have 3 benefit plans at issue here that are funded by the Racehorse Development Fund. And I think the best way, organization-wise, is I'll go through each plan and I'll tell you the provisions of the plan, the eligibility, the vesting, and then the changes that we're asking for today. And of course, if you have any questions, just shout. There is the PTHA Employees Retirement Plan. That plan is a 401k plan, so it's qualified under the Internal Revenue Code, and it also is subject to ERISA. The plan provides for employees to make salary deferral contributions, and also they may make Roth contributions, which are after-tax contributions that have special distribution tax consequences. And there's an employer contribution that the association makes. The PTHA and any related organizations are included in that plan. The eligibility requirements are 1 year of service, so any employee who has 1 year of service and has attained age 21 becomes eligible to make the contributions under the 401k and Roth portions, and also to receive employer contributions. Currently, there are 14 employees in that plan. The plan has what we call a 6-year graded vesting schedule, meaning that after 2 years, their employees are 20% vested, then 40, 60, 80, 100% vested in the employer contributions, but they're always 100% vested in their own contributions. The only change that we're asking for in this plan is to approve the plan as restated. No discretionary amendments were made during this restatement, but every 6 or so years, IRS requires this type of a plan to be restated and incorporate any changes in the law. So periodically, we'll make amendments just because they're required by law, like things like USERRA, which provides rights for people who are in the armed services. All of those changes have to be incorporated into the document in order to maintain the tax qualified status. And so that's the changes that we're asking for today. It's just putting all of those together in one document and following what IRS requires. The second plan I want to talk about is the PTHA Trainers Retirement Plan. That plan is not covered by ERISA. It's not an employee plan. It's got its own, own tax status. The plan has 174 trainers currently involved in the plan. And the eligibility is determined generally based on racing starts. So I'll tell you what the eligibility is. It has been 20 eligible starts, provided that 60% of the trainers' annual starts, 65% of the trainers' annual starts are at Parks Racing. And we're asking to approve an amendment changing that to 15 starts, from 20 to 15 starts. A trainer may also become eligible by reason of having 100 eligible starts during the year or the prior calendar year, or having a full barn at Parks Racing. And participants are vested after 5 years of eligibility in that plan, and they get distributions only upon certain events, such as attaining retirement age or disability or death. The third plan is the PTHA Health Benefit Plan. That plan has the same eligibility requirements for trainers as the Trainers Retirement Plan, and we are requesting the same change from 20 starts down to 15 starts, with 65% of your eligible starts at Parks, and plus the other criteria, full barn or 100 starts. That plan also covers the stable personnel, and it's a combination of an insured health benefit and a health reimbursement under that plan. So again,
let me interject.
Yeah.
May I interject, please? The purpose of the diminution in number of starts is because we've had a diminution number of days. Basically, we were racing 220 days per year, and by agreement with the Parks Racing for other parts of the contract, we agreed to reduce our days to 170, approximately 25%. So we believe that it's necessary to reduce the number of eligibility starts to 25% to be fair to all the trainers, and I think it's reasonable.
We also changed the name of the plan. The Trainers Retirement Plan. We're asking for a name change to Pennsylvania Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association Trainers Non-Qualified Retirement Plan. We're adding the term non-qualified because a lot of the trainers had questions from their accountants about what kind of a plan this is. They thought it was a qualified plan, but the PTHA, not being the employer of the trainers, cannot have that sort of a plan for the employees. So we just added a more descriptive term to reduce confusion about that. And eligible starts also will now include canceled races, which is defined in the amendment. So that's all that I was going to say about the plan, and if you don't have any questions on that, Mike's going to talk about the financial aspect and the reasonableness of administration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the requirements is that the plan maintain a reasonableness, quote unquote, as defined by the statute. So what I've done for your benefit is to break down the cost on a percentage basis and a raw number basis, so you get an idea how much we spend for each of the categories as a percentage of the whole. For example, our health care plan, which incorporates not only the trainers but the backstretch employees and employees of the PTHA, the approximate total cost of that is $2,367,000 a year, or approximately 74% of the budget. The pension plan, which also covers the trainers and certain employees of the PTHA, amounts to about approximately $442,000 per year, or 14%. We also have an obligation under the statute to give the jockeys $250,000 per year for their disability plan, which we pay in quarterly payments. That's 8% of our budget. So the total budget for our health care and pension and the jockeys is 96%, and our actual expense for administrative expense is 4%, which I think is more than reasonable, given the fact that the statute allows 15%. So I'm pleased to announce to you that we certainly have come under the requirements of reasonableness. I think we give more bang for the buck than probably any other plan in existence, and I'm pleased to say that it certainly qualifies under the statute.
Thank you. You have anything else at this point?
No, we asked for your approval of these amendments.
Just a question. Do you have any further comments on this, Kyle?
I do not.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the board?
Counselor, nice to see you again. I know you've been here a
Likewise,
number
yes.
of times before, Mr. Velez. You may have answered this question before, but the non-qualified retirement plan, is that historic? I mean, it's a little unusual to have for employees, non-executives, to have a non-qualified plan, as I recall.
It is an unusual plan. As a matter of fact, I consider it a unique plan as far as the tax structure goes. And for that reason, we took the protective step of going to IRS and actually getting a letter ruling about the tax issues related to that plan. The individuals covered aren't employees of the association. So it doesn't fall under executive compensation as you normally see it. It doesn't fall under employees' plans. So what is it and when do people get taxed? And we didn't want it to be viewed as anything that would potentially compromise the 501c6 status of the association, or C9, I'm sorry, C6 status of the association. So we went to IRS and actually got a favorable ruling on that. And it was a ruling of first impression. It took us 3 years of discussing it with IRS to get that ruling. But
And you have a copy of that letter?
Yeah.
You do.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Tony?
Thank you, sir. Just one quick question. What percentage of all the employees participate in this? Is it 100% or?
Well, employees or trainers?
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, trainers.
That's okay. I always make, because of my tax brain, yeah, the trainers, Mike will
Yeah.
tell you.
Of the eligible trainers, 100%.
Okay.
Well, yeah, of the eligible meaning they met the number of
Right.
starts.
We have that whole list of things where they have a barn, 100 starts, 20 starts, 15 starts. If you're eligible, they're all in the plan,
All in the plan. Thank you.
Anything, Bill?
which encompasses probably of the folks who run at Parks Racing, probably 80% are covered, make the eligibility requirement.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to grant the amendments to the Pennsylvania Thoroughbred Horsemen Association's retirement and health benefit plans as described by the Office of Racetrack Gaming.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman,
Chairman.
members of the
Thank you,
board.
members.
Thank you, Kevin, as always.
Next, we'll hear from our director. You're not the director of human resources, but we're going to hear from Claire at this point. You got a new title, Claire.
Good morning, Chairman, board members. We have one administrative motion for your consideration today relative to the PGCB classification and compensation structure. With the recent changes to the agency's organizational structure, there were 3 positions that needed to either be placed onto the classification and compensation structure or have their pay grades changed within the structure. A memo explaining these changes was provided to you in advance of this meeting. To summarize the changes, the position of Administrative Director was added to the structure in pay grade GE05. The position of Director of Gaming Laboratory Operations was moved from pay grade GE04 to GE03. And the position of Director of Information Technology was moved from pay grade GE02 to GE03. I would be happy to entertain any questions you may have relative to these changes. If none, I would ask for a motion formalizing the changes as described.
Any questions or comments from the board?
One quick question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Claire, just for the public record, these change in classifications, they will not result in any pay change or salary change to current employees. I mean, the ranges change, but what these individuals in these positions are making now, it will not have an effect on their current compensation. Is that correct?
Correct. In terms of there was nobody in the position when the position was changed.
Okay.
So it doesn't move anybody's pay up or down because of the change. The changes were made and then individuals were put into those positions.
Thank you.
May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the amendments to the PGCB classification and compensation structure as proposed by the Administrative Director.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Thanks,
you.
Claire. Dave Wren, our Financial Management Director.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm here today to present the second quarterly budget update of the fiscal year. The current year budget appropriation is $40,169,000. Overall, we are within budget and currently projecting a surplus for the fiscal year due to higher than expected vacancies. As of December 31st, our employee count stood at 295. This was down 4 from last fiscal year and down 18 from the year before that. The current year budget was based on over 300 positions. Now that we're carrying less than 295 for most of the first half of the fiscal year, that's the reason for the surplus projection. During the first half, in fact, the complement level fell as low as 292, which was the lowest in 7 years, and that's before table games were enacted. Due to timing differences, expenses were up 6.1% or $1 million for the first half of the fiscal year. Nearly all of the increase is due to one additional payroll hitting in the current year versus last year. Overall expenditures totaled $18.1 million through December. $16 million of this, or 88%, was for payroll and benefits. Despite rising costs, the average biweekly payroll total was essentially unchanged from last year due to carrying fewer positions. Benefit expenses were 69% of total salary expenses, up from 67% last year and 60% the year before that. Operating and fixed asset expenses for the first half totaled $2.1 million, or 12% of overall expenses. This total is down $15,000 from last year. Nearly 70% of the $2.1 million in operating expenses were for rentals and leases, totaling $755,000, and service expenditures, which consists of interagency billings, directors and officers insurance, and investigative fingerprint fees, which totaled $614,000. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Dave from anybody?
If I can, Mr. Chairman. Dave, you indicated that so far we're running a surplus for this fiscal year. If you can answer, I would ask, how much money, if any, did the board give back at the end of last fiscal year? Do you remember?
It was north of $1.5 million.
Okay.
Not sure the exact figure.
Any other questions or comments? May I have a motion? Oh, there is no motion. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we do. Oh, no. No, it's
Kidding.
Doug. There you go.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Our first agenda item relates to a proposed regulation, which Assistant Chief Counsel Susan Yoakum is here to present.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. The agenda item is a proposed rulemaking 125-204. It will add 2 new table games to the complement of games available for play in the Commonwealth, and that would be Cajun Stud and 4-Card Prime. Included in this rulemaking are the rules of play, dealing procedures, and permissible payout odds. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to adopt proposed regulation number 125-204 as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Thank you so much.
Today, we have 3 petitions before you for your consideration. Each can be decided on the documents filed of record as they are uncontested. For each of the matters, the board has, in advance of this meeting, been provided with the petition, OEC's answer, as well as any evidentiary materials which have been filed of record. The first matter is that of Alexander Sung's petition for reconsideration of the board's denial of his gaming employee permit renewal application. By way of background, in January of 2016, Mr. Sung submitted a renewal application for his gaming permit to allow him to continue to work as a table game dealer at Harrah's, Philadelphia. In March of 2016, the Office of Enforcement Counsel recommended the denial of his renewal application based upon his failure to file 2013-2014 federal tax returns, as well as non-compliance with Department of Revenue obligations. As a result of that recommendation, on May 26, 2016, the board denied his renewal. On November 29th of last year, Mr. Sung informed the board that he is now compliant with the federal and Commonwealth taxes, and as a result has requested reconsideration of the board's denial. The board's Bureau of Investigation Enforcement had confirmed that with DOR that Mr. Sung is compliant, and also confirmed that he had filed his federal tax returns through 2014. There was a matter of his tax returns concerning 2015 still being outstanding, and I think the recommendation which had come to the board prior to right now was that he be approved for renewal subject to BIE confirming his 2015 taxes. So there's a little wrinkle in what we had discussed yesterday during our deliberations. Mr. Sung has come to the hearing today, to the public meeting, and I'm told that he has presented his 2015 returns to OEC and that there now is no objection, so we can present him for reconsideration of the denial and renew his gaming permit without regard to any conditions for the 2015 returns. That matter is now ready for disposition.
Just one quick question before I open this up. Mr. Coyne, is the Revenue Department satisfied with the situation?
Yes, we always get those returns and the money with them.
Very nice. Any questions or comments from the board? In that case, I'll take a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant the petition of Alexander Sung seeking reconsideration for his gaming employee occupation permit renewal application.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion is adopted.
The next petition before the board pertains to the Office of Enforcement Counsel's request to place Janie Deck on the involuntary exclusion list. After originally requesting a hearing, Ms. Deck subsequently decided to waive her right to a hearing and have the board decide the matter based upon the documentary record. The uncontested facts in the matter show that on July 1st of 2016, Ms. Deck, who was 20 years old, used a false identification card to gain entrance to the Presque Isle gaming floor. Upon security discovering she was underage, she was escorted off the floor and subsequently charged with carrying a false identification card, a charge she pled guilty to. The matter to exclude her is now ready for the board's consideration.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant the petition for placement of Jenny Deck on the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel, and that Ms. Deck be placed on the board's excluded persons list until at least her 22nd birthday, at which time she may petition to be removed from the list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
And the final petition is that of Paul Hung. It's a petition for early reapplication for a G2 permit. In March of 2012, Mr. Hung filed an application for a gaming employee occupation permit to seek work as a table game dealer at Valley Forge Casino. Prior to ever beginning his employment there, apparently Mr. Hung decided not to continue to seek the employment at Valley Forge, and he let the application process go to the point that he was declared to be non-compliant with the licensing process. In turn of non-compliance, he simply didn't respond to requests for information. As a result, he subsequently was denied an application due to the lack of cooperation by the board on July 12th, 2012. The request now before the board states that Mr. Hung has been working at Harris Casino in Atlantic City for the past 5 years and is seeking to transfer to the Harris Philadelphia Casino in order to gain a full-time supervisor position. Typically, when there's a denial, there's a 5-year prohibition for reapplication. In this case, 4 years has passed without the full 5-year period lapsing, and therefore he has requested that he be permitted to apply early, that is after 4 years, to seek employment at Harris Chester.
This 5-year normal restriction, is that statutory or is that by practice here?
That's in our regulation. Because it's in a regulation, the board has the discretion to grant relief from it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant Paul Hunn's petition seeking reapplication for a G2 employee permit as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Okay, next presenting withdrawals and reports and recommendations is Deputy Chief Counsel Steve Cook.
Morning. The board has received several unopposed petitions to withdraw the applications or surrender the credentials of individuals or businesses. These persons and entities are as follows: Mark Camilla, Wesley Robert Edens, Innovative Business Concepts, Inc., Stuart Cohen, Will O'Connor and Will O.C. Media, LLC, DEQ Systems Corp., Gurpreet S. Dinza, Justin M. Findley, Bradley J. Broderick, and Todd P. Cravens. The Office of Enforcement Counsel has no objection to any of these withdrawals and surrenders, and as a result, if the board were to grant same today, they would be doing so without prejudice to each of these parties.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue orders to approve the withdrawals and surrenders as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next on the board's agenda are reports and recommendations. I would note for the record that each of these reports and recommendations have received from the Office of Hearings and Appeals have been provided to the board in advance of today's meeting, as well as the evidentiary record behind each report and recommendation. In addition to that, each person that is the subject to the report and recommendation has been notified that the board was taking the matter up today and that they had the ability to come forward or come today and briefly address the board. At least one of these individuals is present today. And I would also note for the record that on the board agenda there are 4 reports and recommendations. However, the second one listed, James Evans III, I would request we pass over that today. Mr. Evans apparently misread the notice and appeared in our Wilkes-Barre office. And as a result, he does want to appear in front of the board, so we'll schedule it for the next meeting, the next board.
Very well.
The first report and recommendation before the board pertains to Pasang Sherpa. Mr. Sherpa was issued a gaming employee occupation permit in April of 2013 and worked as a table games dealer at Presque Isle Downs. On August 2nd, 2016, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for an emergency suspension of Mr. Sherpa's gaming permit after learning that he'd been charged with several criminal offenses, including one felony offense, after on February 18th, 2016, after following an arrest for DUI on that date. When Mr. Sherpa was transported home after processing by the Pennsylvania State Police, he became uncooperative with the authorities, which resulted in a struggle and one of the troopers being injured. As a result of that conduct, he was arrested on further charges above and beyond the DUI, including the felony I mentioned previously. And as a result of that conduct, alleged conduct, and the felony charge, the executive director issued an emergency suspension. A hearing on the validity of the emergency suspension was held on October 19th, 2016. Prior to that meeting, Mr. Sherpa's counsel, his criminal defense attorney, contacted the Office of Hearings and Appeals, indicating that they were aware the hearing was occurring, but they would not be participating. As a result, the only evidence put into the record was OEC's evidence about the charges and the underlying basis for those charges. And as a result of that evidence, the hearing officer's recommendation is that the emergency suspension remain in place.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the suspension of Pasang Sherpa's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
There are two other reports and recommendations on the agenda today. They are related. They involve two brothers, Cameron and Ryan Kazokas. Mr. Ryan Kazokas is present today and has indicated he would like to address the board, so I'd call him forward. And while he's coming forward, I will briefly give the board a synopsis of the reports and recommendations. Basically, the reports and recommendations there are two for Cameron and Ryan Kazokas. Hearings in these matters was held on September 29th, 2016, with both the Office of Enforcement Counsel and both of the Kazokas brothers appearing and offering evidence. The undisputed evidence at those hearings shows that on January 16th, 2016, a patron at the Mohegan Sun at Pocono Downs Casino reported to casino personnel that her cell phone was missing. A review of surveillance video showed the patron and her friend sitting at a casino bar with their cell phone located on the bar. Cameron Kazokas, along with Ryan Kazokas and a third individual, Christopher Gillespie, are seen in the video talking to the patron and one of her friends. At one point, while the patron's back was turned toward the machine, Cameron Kazokas took the phone and placed it into Ryan's back pocket. Thereafter, the three men left the area and the patron can be seen searching for her phone. Shortly thereafter, the three men return to the center bar to again speak to the patron, and she informs them that her phone is missing. Ryan then walks away from the conversation and drops the phone on the floor, where it is later retrieved by security. Cameron Kazokas testified at his hearing that he was intoxicated and did not remember taking the cell phone. He admitted that the video shows him taking the phone, but he states that he must have thought it was his own cell phone rather than that of someone else's. Ryan testified that he did not ask his brother to take the phone, nor did he realize the phone was placed in his back pocket. He also testified that he did, in fact, tell the police he had the phone, but he did not mean to do any harm to the women. Subsequently, a report and recommendation was issued in each of these two cases, recommending that Cameron and Ryan Kazokas be placed on the board's exclusion list. In reaching this conclusion, the hearing officer opines that he believed the incident was fueled by alcohol intoxication and that there was no criminal intent on the part of the brothers. Notwithstanding that conclusion, the hearing officer recommends both brothers be placed on the exclusion list in furtherance of the board's historical desire to have a strict regulatory process in this area, and so as to be consistent with the treatment of the third individual, Christopher Gillespie, whom the board has previously placed on the exclusion list pursuant to a default judgment. Both Kazokas brothers filed exceptions to the hearing officer's report and recommendation, arguing first that OEC had not met its burden to place them on the exclusion list, and second, that the hearing officer's rationale of placing them on the list to be consistent with the treatment of Mr. Gillespie was improper. Both of these matters are ready for consideration. We will need two separate motions because they are two separate reports and recommendations. As indicated, Ryan is present to address the board. I would like to address the board.
Mr. Gazokis, if you're going to address the court, would you please stand and be sworn? You may proceed.
Okay, so let me just preface this by saying I speak for myself. I deeply regret my actions that night, and they were definitely fueled by intoxication, but not as bad as it wasn't that bad. The recommendation states if the board desires a strict regulatory process for gaming, then respondent should be placed on list via default judgment. That was Chris's default judgment, so he was placed on the exclusion list. For PACS 1514E3 states that the list is not all-inclusive. Any list compiled by the board of persons to be excluded or rejected shall not be deemed an all-inclusive list. Therefore, if that's the only basis on placing us on myself on the exclusion list, then this does not follow this amendment. That's about it.
Just to make sure I understand something, you're here on your own behalf or also on behalf of your brother?
On my own behalf, sorry.
Okay, you're not raising these issues as to your brother?
That's his own.
Okay. Other questions?
No.
No questions. Can I have a motion?
Are we going out of
We need
order?
two motions.
Oh, there's two.
I believe,
Okay.
I'm not sure which one's first.
Cameron.
Cameron's first.
Oh, okay. That threw me
All
off.
right,
'cause
that's what
Ryan.
confused me. Okay. Go ahead.
And this is Ryan here.
And
Gotcha.
we're going with Cameron first, right?
Right.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I thought we were going out of order. Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation of the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the placement of Cameron Kazakis on the PGCB involuntary exclusion list, but note the hearing officers but not the hearing officers' underlying rationale.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Just
Second
proceed
motion
to
would
say-
involve Ryan Kazokas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kazokis, you heard the statement of facts by Mr. Cook. Do you deny any of the facts that Mr. Cook laid out?
I do not. I never denied having the phone that night to anybody once I knew I had it.
So your brother's initial story that, he thought it was his phone wasn't true?
I have no idea. I wasn't with him when he took. I was with him, but I was not standing by him when he took the phone. So maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but I can't speak for that.
Thank you.
Other questions? Have a motion?
Sir, you indicated that you thought this was your phone? Is that what you're saying?
No, that was my brother who took the phone and placed it in my pocket. That was his statement.
Okay.
I have no idea if he thought that or not. I just know I found the phone in my pocket a few minutes later.
And you didn't?
I had no idea until I saw the evidence that he put it in my pocket.
Did you have a phone that night?
I have actually two phones.
Both with you?
Right now?
That night?
Oh, yeah. I actually even showed one of the security staff that I had an iPhone, an older one, and I showed him that it was mine. I was able to prove that it was mine.
All right.
I have a follow-up question.
Please.
Steve, I guess to you. The surveillance video, when finding the phone, how did the phone get dropped on the floor? Did his brother take it out of his pocket, or did he take it out of his pocket and drop it on the floor?
I took it out of my own pocket.
Well, then you knew that the phone was there.
I do, and I state that I should have gave the phone back to her once I realized I had it, but I just in a panic I just wanted to leave and drop it and get out of there.
Now, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the recommendation of the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the placement of Ryan Kazokis on the PGCB involuntary exclusion list, but not the hearing officer's underlying rationale.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
And that concludes all matters of the Office of Chief Counsel.
Thank you. Next part of the agenda is Sue Hensel with the Bureau of Licensing. Good morning, Sue.
Thank you, Chairman Barish and members of the board. Before the board today will be 3 table game manufacturer licenses and 529 principal key gaming and non-gaming employee applicants. In addition, there will be the consideration of 15 gaming service provider applicants. The first matter for your consideration is the approval of the table game manufacturer license for Count R GmbH. Count R is a German company specializing in gaming-related cash and ticket redemption products. The company makes, among other products, a micro-ticket redemption machine designed to be installed at table games. The redemption machine allows the table game dealer to issue chips in exchange for vouchers and vouchers in exchange for chips. Count R has asked that the board grant it a reduced licensing fee. The licensing fee for the manufacturer's initial 1-year license is normally $50,000. Under the Gaming Act, the board may modify the fee for a table game manufacturer if it determines that the fee will unreasonably limit a table game product in Pennsylvania. Consistent with this provision of the Act, the Bureau of Licensing has adopted a reduced licensing fee policy which takes into account how many manufacturers produce a particular product as well as the amount of revenue the company anticipates earning. The policy has previously been presented to the board. Count R has requested a reduced fee of 0, which is consistent with the Bureau's policy. The company is the only maker in Pennsylvania of that micro ticket redemption machine. The Bureau of Licensing recommends that the board grant the reduced licensing fee. The Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement has completed its investigation, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with a background investigation and suitability report. I have also provided you with a draft order and ask that the board consider the order approving a table game manufacturer license for Count R GmbH, including the reduced licensing fee.
Comments from Enforcement Council?
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the table games manufacturer license of Count R GmbH as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next for your consideration is the renewal of the TCX John Huxley America Inc.'s table game manufacturer license. TCS John Huxley America is a subsidiary of TCS John Huxley Europe Limited, whose license renewal you will consider next. The Nevada-based business manufactures and sells a variety of table game-related products, including the Big Six wheels manufactured by its parent company. The Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement has completed its investigation, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with a background investigation and suitability report. I have provided you with a draft order and ask that the board consider the order to renew the table game manufacturer license.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the renewal of TCS John Huxley America Inc.'s table game manufacturer license as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also for your consideration is the renewal of the TCS John Huxley Europe Limited's table game manufacturer license. TCS John Huxley Europe is headquartered in the United Kingdom. The company manufactures roulette and Big Six wheels as well as chip sorting machines. The Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement has completed its investigation, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with a background investigation and suitability report. I have provided you with an order and ask that the board consider the order to renew the table game manufacturer license.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the renewal of TCS John Huxley Europe Limited's table game manufacturer license as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also for your consideration is the approval of principal and key employee licenses. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a proposed order for 7 principal and 14 key employee licenses. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of principal and key employee licenses as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
There are also temporary key employee licenses for your consideration. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order regarding the issuance of temporary licenses for 9 key employees. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of temporary key employee credentials as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next, there are gaming permits and non-gaming registrations. The Bureau of Licensing has provided you with a list of 349 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted temporary or full occupation permits, and 131 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted registrations under the authority delegated to the Bureau of Licensing. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the order.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of gaming employee permits and non-gaming employee registrations as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also, there are recommendations of denial for 2 gaming employee applicants. In each case, the applicant failed to request a hearing within the specified time frame. The Bureau of Licensing has provided you with orders addressing these applicants who the Office of Enforcement Counsel has recommended for denial. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the denials.
Enforcement Council continues to request denial in each instance.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board deny the gaming employee applications as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
In addition, for your consideration are withdrawal requests for gaming and non-gaming employees. In each case, the permit or registration is no longer required. For today's meeting, I've provided the board with a list of 15 gaming and 2 non-gaming employee withdrawals for approval. I ask that the board consider the orders approving the list of withdrawals.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the withdrawals as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next, we have an order to certify the following gaming service providers: HFB Phil Management LLC, Keating Consulting LLC, L&H Signs Inc., and SportView Television Corporation, doing business as SportView Technologies. I ask that the board consider the order approving these gaming service providers for certification.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applications for gaming service provider certification as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Finally, for your consideration are gaming service provider registrations. The Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order and an attached list of 11 registered gaming service provider applicants. I ask that the board consider the order registering these gaming service providers.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applications for gaming service provider registration as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
That concludes the matters of the Bureau of
Thanks,
Licensing.
Susan. Next up, Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Good morning. This morning, we will present 24 matters for the board's consideration, consisting of 3 consent agreements, 5 revocations, 16 involuntary exclusions. Next matter up on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Sands Bethworks LLC. This matter will be presented by Senior Enforcement Counsel Michael Rowland.
Well, before we proceed, I would ask anyone addressing the board to state and spell your name for the court reporter as we get started here. And anybody other than attorneys should stand to be sworn as well. Cyrus, well, if you would.
That's you, Mike.
All of you. Still want them to identify. Would all 3 of you please identify yourselves?
Michael Magazoo, M-A-G-A-Z-Z-U, Vice President and General Counsel, Sands Bethworks Gaming, LLC.
Mark Giuliano, Juliano, Chief Operating Officer, Sands Bethworks.
Matthew Forbes, Forbes, Director of Security, Sands Bethworks.
Thank you. Morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Michael Rowland, ROL A&D with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The first proposed consent agreement consists of 4 separate fact patterns which address 5 underage incidents at Sands Casino. In our first count, we have Taylor Michael Logan, who was 19 years of age. He was found on the gaming floor and consuming alcoholic beverages at Sands. Mr. Logan was initially discovered by a cocktail server who challenged that he was 33 years old, as stated on the driver's identification he provided. Sands security was dispatched to the slot machine where Mr. Logan was seated, and after security asked several questions about the identification, Mr. Logan admitted that it was not his and that he consumed 2 alcoholic drinks. Mr. Logan entered the casino through the main entrance where security reviewed the identification. The identification was scanned and accepted. Mr. Logan was on the gaming floor for approximately 1 hour and 17 minutes before he was approached by security. He gamed for approximately 44 minutes at 2 separate slot machines. Mr. Logan was charged by the Pennsylvania State Police with carrying a false identification card and a purchase of alcohol by a minor. He was permanently evicted from Sands Casino, and the incident was self-reported. Our second incident involves So-Hun Mayung, and she presented a Korean passport at the bus entrance of Sands Casino before being granted access to the gaming floor. Security misread the passport, which indicated Miss Mayung was only 20 years of age. She was on the gaming floor for approximately 7 hours before she hit a $1,624 jackpot at a slot machine. She gamed for approximately 6 hours and 22 minutes at 10 different slot machines. She was identified as underage when she presented her Korean passport to the slot attendant to claim the jackpot. Sands security confiscated both the jackpot and a $62.45 gaming voucher. Ms. Mayung did not consume alcoholic beverages and was not charged by the Pennsylvania State Police. She was permanently evicted, and this incident was also self-reported by Sands. Our third count involves Sands surveillance, who notified the Bureau of Casino Compliance about 2 underage patrons, Kenyetta Meadows, age 20, and Thomas Rollins, age 19, who were found on the gaming floor. Both Mr. Meadows and Mr. Rollins used false identification to enter the casino. Mr. Meadows and Mr. Rollins were identified as underage after being involved in a fight in the Sands parking garage. After learning of the arrest, Sands surveillance did a review and determined that both Mr. Meadows and Mr. Rollins had gamed. Prior to the fight at the parking garage, Mr. Meadows and Mr. Rollins entered the casino through the bus entrance where security requested identification. Mr. Meadows and Mr. Rollins were on the gaming floor for approximately 1 hour and 13 minutes. Mr. Meadows gamed for approximately 43 of those minutes at 2 separate slot machines. Mr. Rollins gamed for approximately 15 minutes at 3 separate slot machines. The Bethlehem police cited Mr. Meadows and Mr. Rollins with disorderly conduct, and the incident was self-reported by Sands. And our last count, the Bureau of Casino Compliance was notified by Sands Security about a possible underage individual, Jody Lynn Bear, age 20, who was on the gaming floor at Sands Casino. After an extensive review, Mr. Bear was found to be on the floor for approximately 3 hours and 59 minutes. He gamed for 3 hours and 25 of those minutes at 22 different slot machines. After review of surveillance footage, it was revealed that Mr. Bear was not challenged at the main entrance despite there being 4 security guards present. Mr. Bear was discovered when he was asked for identification by a beverage server while gaming at a slot machine. Mr. Bear was unable to provide his identification, and security was notified. Mr. Bear did not consume alcohol on the gaming floor, nor did he engage in table games play. Mr. Bear was charged with a minor on the gaming floor. That's under our act, specifically Section 1518, and he was permanently evicted from the Sands Casino. This incident was also self-reported. The Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board approve this consent agreement between the parties. The terms of the settlement include that within 5 days of the board's order approving this consent agreement, Sands shall pay a civil penalty of $50,000 for the alleged violations described. Also, within 5 days of the board's order approving this consent agreement, SANS shall pay the board $2,500 for the costs incurred by OEC, BIE, and other related staff in connection with the matter. Further, SANS shall immediately review its policies and controls and provide training and guidance to its employees, which will minimize the opportunity for the occurrence of similar incidents in the future. If you have any questions, we'll take them at the time.
Thank you. Before we proceed to questions, any comments from SANS at this point?
Thank you, Chairman, members of the board. Just that we acknowledge and agree with the facts as stated in the consent agreement and cited by the Office of Enforcement Counsel on the record here today. We regret that these incidents occurred, and we firmly believe that the measures that we have taken and will continue to take, particularly in the next couple of months, a more robust ID scanning system at each of our entrance points will have a significant impact on our ability to combat this problem in 2017 and beyond. And with that, we ask that you approve the consent agreement as written, and if you have any questions, we will do our best to answer them.
I have a question before I turn it on to others. It may not be relevant to this particular case, but I'm just curious as a matter of policy. If you have scanners and whatnot and you discover that they're not working, do you ever inform us, or you just take the scanner and put it in a closet, or what do you do?
We would certainly notify the on-site office if scanners aren't working. So the answer to your question directly is yes. Our challenge has been that the handheld scanners that we use, which very infrequently do not work. I can't ever remember an instance when.
But
they
the
weren't
standard
working.
policy would be, if you have a scanner that's not working, that you would tell people from the Gaming Control Board about that? That's the way you proceed?
To my knowledge, yes, I would defer to
Is that
Mr.
accurate,
Forbes as
gentlemen?
our Director of
Yes.
Security.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. I'll open it up to other questions.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Giuliano, first of all, thank you for being here. As you know, these are serious matters, serious fine, and we appreciate you as the GM and the head of that SANS Bethwork being here today. Having said that, what discipline has been meted out to the employees involved in this issue, specifically the security guard who did not card the 120-year-old, as I recall from the facts, that came in? Can you just go through the disciplinary measures?
I believe, Commissioner.
Could you speak up a little bit?
Sorry, I believe that the incident you're referring to, if I'm not mistaken, is the last one noted by the Office of Enforcement Counsel, where the individual walked through the entrance without being challenged. There were 3 security officers who received last and final warnings. That, according to our policy, is the discipline that is issued for a first infraction of this type. A second such infraction within 12 months would result in termination. So those 3 security officers received last and final warnings. One of those security officers was terminated as a result of one of the other incidents that is the subject of this consent agreement, the second one that was mentioned.
Thank you.
So,
Other questions?
The second one is mentioned is the Korean passport.
that's correct.
I'm curious, I'm guessing, and I will plead ignorance, and Greg is thinking, finally, he pleads ignorance. Right? No.
We wouldn't say
The
that.
passport is written in Korean, or
I-
it's in English?
It was in English, wasn't it? It was in English.
Okay, well then that answers my question. Thank you.
Bill, did you have a question?
No.
I have one.
Go ahead.
Do you have a question?
Any others?
What changes are you making? I mean, this has occurred before. So, what can you do new, different to prevent this from happening? I know it's a difficult situation, but we do take this very seriously. Maybe if you could just expound on that a little bit, and maybe, we always hear that you train your employees to card these individuals if they anybody that's 30 years old or under. You're really attacking, a 30-year-old just to make sure that a 20-year-old is not getting on there. I mean, does that work, or maybe just talk about the changes that you're making and expound on that a little bit?
Well, I'll and certainly Matt and Michael will add, but one of the most significant changes that we've made, if anyone has been there recently, we had a system where we were using stanchions with just theater style velvet ropes, and we replaced all of them and put permanent steel and brass gates around around all the entrances, with only one place forcing the people to where the security checkpoint is. And we believe that that has been a help and will continue to be a help. I mean, literally would have to jump over the fence, which I hope someone would notice if that happened. And the other thing is that we are, and I'm going to let Matt explain this because it gets a little bit more technical, we are upgrading the scanning system.
We will be upgrading the scanning system to a full 3M scanner. So we'll be able to read all driver's license, IDs, passports. It'll slow down the process a little bit, but it will also verify that fake IDs as well. It goes through almost a forensic style scan to do this. It slows down a little bit, but at least it'll give us time and opportunity to make sure that we challenge people more and we're able to look at it further.
How many, on average, how many people do you turn away in a day? Just top of your head, I know you may not have it, but
yeah, I can tell you that just today we went over some of these statistics. There's 25,000 people a day that walk through the casino.
Average visitors, yes.
Average visitors.
Yes.
So of those 25,000, Matt, how many do we turn away?
I say off the top of my head, we're looking probably close to 300 a day.
That many try to get through?
I would guesstimate, but I would have to pull those numbers just to be sure.
Thank you.
One of the, just to elaborate on Matt's point, Commissioner, and I started to mention before, one of the challenges with those handheld scanners is that the sophistication of some of these fake IDs is such that the barcode will have the person's information on it and looks like the person, it looks like a real ID. This more robust system that we are in the process of incorporating does a multi-point check, a much more comprehensive check on the ID to test the legitimacy of it. And we find that the way that it functions at our cage and at the MySands Player Loyalty Center works much better. And we truly believe that when that happens, which should be by the end of Q1, we will see much better results.
Great. Thank you for your testimony.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Hearing none. May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Sands Bethworks Gaming LLC as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is adopted. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for your time.
Next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Sugar House HSP Gaming LP. This matter will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel James Armstrong. Give him a chance to.
Before we proceed with representatives for Sugar House, please identify themselves, and if you're not an attorney, stand and be sworn.
Wendy Hamilton, General Manager at Sugar House Casino.
Anthony Dilacqua, D-I-L-A-C-Q-U-A, Director of Security. I do.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. James Armstrong on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel, ARM, that's TRONG. Next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement reached between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Sugar House Casino in regard to 5 incidents of underage gambling involving 10 individuals. In the first incident, on January 22nd, 2016, a casino compliance review revealed that at 1:23 a.m., 2 underage patrons were allowed entry to the Sugar House gaming floor, and notification was not properly made to the Bureau of Casino Compliance and the Pennsylvania State Police. The underage patrons, along with 2 companions, were admitted after security requested and reviewed their identification. One underage patron went to a blackjack game and gambled for 25 minutes until a pit manager requested his identification and determined that it looked suspicious and called security. Security scanned his identification and determined it to be invalid. Security confiscated the false identification from this underage patron and also that of his companion. The surveillance review revealed the companion gambled at a roulette game for approximately 30 minutes. Further review by the casino compliance representative revealed that both individuals were underage and college students, approximately 19 and 20 years of age. Both underage patrons were allowed to leave without security notifying the state police or the Bureau of Casino Compliance. Sugar House reported that the security officers who checked the identification of the underage patrons were not able to use the handheld scanners because they were inoperative at the time. Commissioners, in the second incident on May 8th, the Bureau of Casino Compliance received notification from Sugar House Security that 3 underage patrons were detected by a Sugar House pit manager at a blackjack game at 11:57 p.m. The 3 patrons admitted to security they were underage and that they had used false identification to gain entry into the casino. Sugar House requested and reviewed the identification upon allowing entry at 11 p.m. but not utilize a scanner. The individuals were all confirmed to be 18 years old and college students. The surveillance review determined that the 3 underage patrons were on the casino floor for approximately 1 hour, gamed on 4 blackjack tables, and were served beer. The state police issued them citations for being underage. The underage patrons were also issued formal eviction notices and escorted off the property. In the third incident, on May 29th, a casino compliance representative observed 5 individuals on the casino floor who appeared to be underage and requested security check their identifications. The last individual produced a Pennsylvania identification card that belonged to someone who was born in 1978. The female, who was subsequently identified as a minor and only 15 years old, was instructed to accompany security and the Bureau of Casino Compliance to the security office. The minor and 2 of her companions resisted, and the state police responded to the casino floor. A trooper took custody of the minor and escorted her to the back of the house. The surveillance review revealed the minor was allowed entry at 1:22 a.m. after her identification was requested and reviewed by Sugar House Security. Security did not utilize scanners. The minor was on the casino floor for approximately 30 minutes and gamed on 4 slot machines. The state police issued the minor a citation for being underage and released her to the custody of her mother. She was also issued a formal eviction notice. Commissioners, in the fourth incident on June 3rd, the Bureau of Casino Compliance received notification from Sugar House Security that 3 underage patrons were detected on a blackjack game. After the 3 underage patrons were questioned about their identification, they admitted to security they were all underage and they had used false identifications to gain entry into the casino. The surveillance review revealed that security did not utilize the scanner at the point of entry to check whether the identifications were authentic. The surveillance review also revealed that the 3 underage patrons played blackjack for 25 minutes and were served alcoholic drinks before they were confronted by security. The 3 underage patrons were also determined to be 18, 19, and 20 years old and college students. The state police issued them citations for being underage on the casino floor and for consuming alcoholic beverages underage. They were issued formal eviction notices and escorted off the property. Commissioners, in the fifth incident on August 19th, the Bureau of Casino Compliance received notification from security that a 20-year-old underage patron was detected on the casino floor. Security advised that they were contacted by a table game supervisor in regard to 3 individuals at a Spanish 21 game who appeared underage. Security asked for identifications. 2 of the individuals produced valid identifications. The 3rd individual produced an out-of-state driver's license. After he was questioned about his identification, the 3rd patron admitted to security he was underage and that he had used false identification to gain entry into the casino. The surveillance review determined that the underage patron gained entry at 12:19 a.m. after security requested and reviewed his identification but did not use a scanner. The underage patron was on the casino floor for 1 hour and 39 minutes, gamed at blackjack, roulette, Spanish 21 tables, and was served alcohol. The state police issued the underage patron a citation for being underage on the casino floor. He was also issued a formal eviction notice and escorted off the property. Commissioners, the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Sugar House Casino respectfully request the board approve the proposed consent agreement and stipulation of settlement, which requires Sugar House to maintain policies and training to prevent similar underage gambling violations from reoccurring, that Sugar House pay a civil penalty in the amount of $100,000 and a fee of $2,500 for costs incurred by the Office of Enforcement Counsel and other board staff in connection with the investigations, assessment, and settlement of these issues. I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have. Mr. Donnelly's here on behalf of Sugar House Casino.
Thank you. Any comments from Sugar House at this time?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Donnelly, appearing on behalf of Sugar House. We, when we first learned of these events, and from the Office of Enforcement Counsel and were advised before the complaint even came or the consent was circulating. My client took this extremely seriously. Essentially, the client determined that it's time to stop the presses here and see what's going wrong in our property. It was a spat of events that occurred mainly in the spring, summer of this year, when some of them coincide with the opening of the new project and so on. We, to that end, did a lot of things that Wendy's going to discuss, but it's been an all-hands-on-deck effort to, before we responded to the consent order, to sit down with our staff, all staff, consider what went wrong, analyze why it went wrong, and then come up with a comprehensive plan to try to stop this in the future. It's a very complex problem, and it has to, because it has people and it has machinery working together. But we have a very, very brief PowerPoint that Wendy is going to present that demonstrates what, in a nutshell, the steps that the company took after it was advised that this consent was going to come up.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. As John said, this is a very complex issue and one that we take very seriously. We had a number of incidents happen during the late spring, early summer of this past year, and by the late summer, we had raised an eyebrow and sat up straight and said, wow, what's going on here? Decided amongst ourselves that it was time to take a look at all of the different pieces that play a part in preventing underage entry to the casino. So we put together an 11-point, what we call our comprehensive underage plan, and went back and reassessed everything from the technology that we use to help our office, the tool our officers use to identify potential underage entrants, the training that we give them, the culture on the property, the incentives that are out there to keep us all focused on this. And we made a number of changes. So I wanted to run through them with you very quickly before we take your questions. We've shared this plan with OEC back in November. One of the things that is, I think, one of the biggest elements of this, and the thing that I've seen change the most in the 25 years I've been involved in the industry, is that some of the IDs that come in now are very, very sophisticated. They cost a lot of money, but they're available on the internet. Our property became much more attractive to varsity athletes from nationally ranked universities at a certain point this year. And these are people who have access and have these IDs. It's a little bit of a scary thing. We had technology in place to scan IDs, and there is a separate issue with that technology and the way that it was working. But even when it was working properly and our officers were consistently scanning, it didn't always pick up some of these newer, more sophisticated fake IDs. The product that we've moved to is much more effective in doing this, which has a double result of number one, it has the ability to catch. Number two, our officers are much more incented to use it because it works. It's consistent, and they get feedback that's very detailed about why an ID is not acceptable for entry. So we've installed the new technology now at all of our 3 entrances, the new north entrance, the old main port entrance, and this very small valet entrance on the south side all have hardwired laptop technology now, where every person who is carded is also swiped. We've implemented surveillance audits on this to know that the officers are actually swiping every ID they check. In December, we were 589 for 589 on the audits that we conducted. In January, we missed 1, and that officer has been disciplined. We went back and looked at our training. We've always done ID training for several of the departments throughout the building. But when this happened, we realized that it's not only important to train folks that this is, why this is important, and that it's their job and that it's everybody's job and everyone on the property receives the training. We brought in a heavier hitter to train people not just to look at the ID and say, okay, what's your address, what's your birthday, and recite the data that's on the ID, but instead to say, what's your sign? things that you need to think, that's just an example, but things that the bearer of the ID would need to think, there's tips for how to kind of sweat the person and make them, come clean, especially 19-year-olds who have paid a lot of money for a great fake ID. And so our security officers are predominantly through that now, and then that training will go to some of the other departments in the building as well. That's done by an outside consultant. We've had a disciplinary matrix in place for several years now. We did take a look back at that. We did not make any changes to it. It seems to work. We differentiate between cases where two officers are talking to each other and a 5-year-old walks in the door without anybody looking. That's an egregious error on the part of the personnel. And in that case, regardless of what's already in your file, and we have a 5-step disciplinary process, regardless of what's in your file, that would go to immediate termination. On the other end of the scale, you have an officer who cards, who swipes. The swipe comes back acceptable. He looks you up and down, he asks you a question or two, he allows you in. It turns out later it's a valid ID, it's the guy's brother, they look exactly alike, and the person is 19. That officer would receive, for example, 1 step of discipline in the 5. So it depends on the egregiousness. Anthony always prepares the discipline, he emails it to me, I approve or challenge it, and then it's applied to the person's personnel file. So again, no changes there. That seems to be working for us. One of the trends we did notice is that the category that seemed to be most highly represented in these counts was 18 and 19-year-old college students. And so we immediately went out first to the university that came through most predominantly, and then to all of the other regional colleges and universities. And we've spoken with several administrators at several colleges and universities. Anthony and Evan, our senior counsel, did a presentation to the Delaware Valley, a group of campus security directors that gathers, and they tend to be the group that is most interested in this because they're used to having contact with students acting out, and they thank you, and they know the step for plugging these students into the disciplinary process within the university. We don't get, it's private. They won't tell us what they did, but they all tell us that yes, in fact, they have dealt with these students internally within the universities and colleges' own systems. They were all very interested. I think the University of Pennsylvania wrote a letter that you've seen separately. We enjoy that partnership, and they've been very, very helpful in this process. In addition, we met with Pennsylvania State Police. We wrote a letter to the commissioner, state police commissioner, requesting that the state police use a different statute to address the offenders because there's not much of a penalty in place for these college kids who are very deliberately doing this. It's like a superbug in a hospital. It's always changing, and they are finding ways. They try one door, they walk around the building and try a different door, again, with these very good fake IDs. And so this has been very difficult for us. We found a statute that the state police could use that would make this a misdemeanor rather than the summary offense that's included under the Gaming Act. There's not full agreement that this should end up being a misdemeanor that goes forever on a 19-year-old's record, and I understand that. What they did do is we all agree that if and when there's an opportunity to change in the Gaming Act the way that this kind of a violation can affect someone's driver's license, which was done in New Jersey years ago and had a big impact, that would be a great idea. And so we've spoken out for that. The state police agree, and like I said, when there's an opportunity to change that in the Gaming Act and perhaps introduce a driver's license suspension for the offender, we believe that would be very effective. So we're working on that front as well. Our officers continue to receive an incentive for any perfect quarter of no underage entries. It's a grossed up $50 per officer for every clean quarter. We have a couple people on our security staff especially who are particularly good. In all but one of these cases, it was our folks who ultimately identified and self-reported these underage entrants, and that's not unusual. But we found that the folks that are particularly good at that, let's put them at the door. Let's let them identify it at the door, not 40 feet inside the casino 30 minutes later. That doesn't make any sense. And so we've, especially on the shifts where this was most prevalent, we've put those folks at before the entrance to the casino. I think I've covered it. The what?
Signage at the door.
Oh, signage at the door, which, yeah, okay, so you're seeing that on the display here. We now have these decals on the glass doors as you enter the property, and the officer that you see here is a life-size cardboard cutout, also placed, that's not out yet, in the main lobbies of the casino to remind folks, especially college kids, that we're not taking this lightly and this isn't the place you want to try out your fake ID. So the new technology went into place in late October. We've had no violations in 3 months. There was some talk during the SANS presentation about some of the statistics, but in 2016 we carded 230,000 people, turned away about 7% of them. They're not all underage. Some of them are expired or otherwise not worthy ID. But since November 1st, this is interesting, 50,000 folks carded. We're up over a point in how many were turned away based on all of the things that this new software evaluates. And 11 of them were underage, and now the state police will respond to the front door, and several of these 11 have been cited. So they did not gain entry, but they have been cited by the state police, which will spread through campuses very, very quickly, and we're very pleased that at that as well. We're ready for your questions.
Questions? Comments from the board? Greg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hamilton, same comment to you. Thank you for being here today. Obviously, this fine is more significant than the one at Sands, and you know our history on this issue, and we do take it very seriously. So thank you for being here today. Having said that, we also bear some blame here. We have casino compliance representatives at our casinos. We have asked our executive director, Kevin O'Toole, to check with our folks and the leadership in that department and find out specifically on the handheld scanners, and I'm going to get to that in a second, Mr. Armstrong. It's my understanding they were inoperable for an extended period of time, and we expect our folks to look into things like that, and that was not done. So moving on to that, one more thing. We do get that when kids come in with sophisticated IDs and they're carded and they get through your security system, you're absolutely right. We have said that publicly, that I believe, and I think most of my colleagues believe, that that's, you know, a venial sin as opposed to letting a 5-year-old in because they're talking and somebody slips through, and that is a mortal sin. And so we understand that, and I think Enforcement Council grades their fines and offenses against you accordingly. So just to put that on the record. Let me move, Mr. Armstrong, to two issues. I did not hear you elaborate on the issue of the handheld scanner, but I thought in our executive session yesterday, it was reiterated to us that that those handheld scanners were inoperable for some period of time. Is that correct?
In the first incident, the one that happened back in January of last year.
And
it
how
turned
long?
out that was the one in which they let the underage
I
leave.
can't hear. Could you?
I'm sorry. That was the one in which they let the underage leave the casino without notifying the state police or the Casino Compliance Bureau.
And how long was that handheld scanner inoperable?
I think it was for a couple of weeks. The one at the door, the one that was at that point of entry where the security officers allowed the underage to come in that night.
And it was a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I believe it was.
Ms. Hamilton, were you aware of that?
So this handheld technology, it's similar to a cell phone that gets passed from shift to shift, all kinds of people handling it all day long. a new battery gets placed each shift. And I would state, and this is, I didn't go back and audit this per se, but my experience tells me that for every hour a particular scanner didn't work, it did work for 9 hours. But they were not, your cell phone battery eventually dies, you can't charge it anymore, and somebody would end up with one that's kind of on the blink, and it would not get immediately reported and replaced with something else from the back office. You could stand in a certain place and it would work better here than it would over here. Unfortunately, the nature of wireless. And so hindsight 2020, that was not a good solution. We all are sleeping better now with these laptops that are, on a podium next to the wall in the lobbies, plugged in 100% of the time, which is also the reason that the officers they love to use it, because they know they're going to get the feedback that they're asking it for.
So you were not aware that there was a handheld scanner or 2 or 5 that were not working for an extended period of time, weeks?
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. Armstrong, the issue of self-reporting. Tell me again about the incident where the one individual or 2 individuals were escorted out and we were not notified. Can you reiterate, give me some additional?
That wasn't an incident of self-reporting. That was where the casino compliance representative was observing surveillance and noticed that they were bringing an underage back to the security, or somebody who appeared to be underage, back to the security office. And when he got down there, it turned out that person was already released. And then he started an investigation and uncovered that there were 2 underage individuals that were in custody at one time by security, suspected of being underage, and were simply escorted off the property.
Ms. Hamilton, what happened to those employees?
I'm going to ask our security director, Anthony Delacqua, to talk about those incidents.
In that particular count, there was some question about the ID. They were 2 of the students, both athletes, as Wendy Hamilton had talked about, with fake IDs. While taken off the floor, a handheld scanner, our old technology handheld scanner, was used. I received a phone call in the middle of the night, as I always do when there's a potential underage incident, and I was informed that it scanned and then it didn't scan, and then they were getting a reader error. There was some question about, at least in the minds of the people in my department at that time, who were present at the time, about the validity of the driver's license. But in their eyes, no definitive evidence that it was a fake or fraudulent license. He was escorted off the floor wrongly, and let me say that up front, wrongly. It was learned that he was in the company of a buddy of his who was approached on the floor, had a similar type of ID. We have seen especially from one particular university, New England, fake New England licenses. These were Connecticut, if memory serves me correct. Again, suspicious, but it looks legitimate. Are on the side of caution in my employee's mind. Get him out. I'm not sure this is good or not. Again, wrong. The officers who failed to properly ID them too as they came in were both disciplined, as well as we have what we call Class 2 officers. They work in business attire or business casual, handle just about all our reports and investigations. In this particular case, the Class 2 officer, a former member of the State Attorney General's office, actually retired and now is in our employee. He was disciplined. He received a write-up for not handling the situation properly, as well as his shift manager, a former member of Philly PD. So both of them were disciplined, and both were told what the procedure should have been. Hold the kid in the back, hold the potential underage in the back until PSP or Gaming Control Board would be able to conduct a full investigation. In this particular case, the PGCB rep on board actually went into, I think it was Facebook or some social media site, and searched the name and found him in a university baseball uniform, and compared that to his photo, and did research through social media. Now, obviously, we don't have that capability if down on the floor as someone comes in. But again, that's why we needed to hold them so someone could do that investigation. So they were all disciplined.
And the discipline given to them, was it one step in the 5-step process that Ms. Hamilton described earlier, or was it more than one step?
For the Class 2 officer, he received accelerated discipline. The shift manager, our management is not handled in the normal, the same as hourly employees for the progressive disciplinary system with the standard form. So as with other management employees, it's a memo spelling out, and I have copies of it here if you need it, but spelling out what was done wrong and how it should have been done, and that, again, further disciplinary action would be taken for future occurrences of a similar nature.
Thank you.
Ms. Hamilton, I was interested in your testimony about sports teams, college sports teams. Did I take that were tried to get in from time to time? We're talking about home teams. We're talking about visiting teams. We're talking about both.
It's been the home team. It's a Philadelphia University, and I've spoken to the coaches myself.
As a longtime college president, and I would deal occasionally, although a small college, with bars that weren't enforcing, looking at identification, et cetera. And I would actually go and sit down with the owners and say, we have a problem, I think, and go through it with them and just remind them that if this was continuing, that, the wrath of law enforcement, I guaranteed, would be over to see them. And so I really made the case. I was concerned about the jeopardy for our students and the jeopardy of, what could occur. And I assume that you have now made sure that the ADs and the student life folks at the colleges or universities understand the jeopardy that can attach to their students for this kind of conduct?
Yes, and they have all jumped at the opportunity. They've engaged willingly with us. Like I said, they won't give us detail, but they promise us that the Office of Student Conduct has dealt with the students that we've given them by name, and they are very willing partners.
And if I may, Wendy, that is not only for the students who we talk about today, the 11 that we alluded to that were caught at the door. Not all of them were college students, but the ones that were, and we were able to identify what university. I've reached out to 2 universities, and it's the same 2 all the time, right?
The 11 turned away in the last 3 months.
They had disciplinary cases opened on them at their schools for the mere fact that they attempted entry. Again, we caught them, they didn't get in, but they still face discipline at their universities.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I have a question or two of my own.
No, I'm good.
I need to understand something. I'm hearing things that don't quite fit together. I think, Ms. Hamilton, you said, you have a portable device and, runs out of battery or something. I'm trying to understand whether these dysfunctions with your portable system, whether this is just a matter of a battery running out or if you actually had equipment that, battery or not, was not working properly.
There is also an issue of the software that was installed in that technology. It was not as effective as the software that's in the new technology.
No, I understand that,
Okay.
but what I heard was that you had machines that were not working, and I'm trying to understand, is that all, as best you know, is that all just a matter of a battery that ran out and had to be replaced, or are we talking about machines that just weren't working?
To my knowledge, there was no single unit that didn't work 100% of the time. They were undependable, I think is the best way I can describe it. Sometimes it was a battery issue, sometimes it was a wireless issue. They were not, and again, hindsight 2020, our officers knew this before, and you're seeing in all 5 of these counts, the folks were carded and not scanned. Now, we scanned after the fact, after we caught them, and some of the licenses scanned successfully. That's a different problem. But the fact that they, and it's no surprise that it's cases where, you know, it's 10 individuals underage, you know, it's no surprise to me that it's actually 100% of these cases where they weren't scanned. That's why they got in. That's part of the reason that they got in, because the officers weren't using it 100% of the time because they didn't feel good about it. They weren't getting the feedback from the tool.
Burrow in there. Is it they just didn't trust any of their machines, or are there particular machines that they didn't trust, or particular locations where they didn't work?
No, they were handheld units, so they wouldn't have necessarily been at the same location at any given time. You know, you sign in for your shift, you're given a unit. It looks a little bit like an iPhone. You slap a new battery into it, you go to your post. You know, hey, mine's kind of on the blink. Can I borrow yours? I'm busy with something else. You know what? This license looks pretty good, and this thing's not going to tell me anything.
You've had a pattern over time until you've come up with your new technology that whether it was individual machines or just the overall approach was not terribly effective, so that you couldn't depend upon it.
The overall approach in the end was proven not to be dependable. It wasn't consistent and it wasn't dependable.
So in that setting, do you believe, if that's what you were dealing with for months sporadically, that there was any obligation for you all to let our folks know that your scanners were undependable?
I would be surprised if the CCRs on property didn't know that this was a struggle for us. But until we had a couple of incidents happen, I don't think anybody said, hey, this is a thing. There's a problem here. In hindsight, it's very easy. I'm the first one saying, what are we doing? Like, why didn't we do this sooner? But that's why we did it. When we noticed, we did it right away.
Well, what I'm trying to pick up on is the comment that my fellow commissioner, Mr. Feit, made at the beginning, which is we have some, obviously, in addition to disciplining you, we have some responsibility to make sure our people are doing their job. And the more I'm hearing, the less clear I am is whether CCRs should have been aware of it on their own, that these scanners weren't working, or whether you people weren't telling them, and what kind of corrective measures, if anything, should have happened if this was something that was unfolding over a period of time.
I don't know, and I don't know whether this is even relevant. I don't know that we're required to have the scanners.
I think that's correct.
I remember adding them a few years back. Because we knew that it would be helpful to us. That was the product that was kind of the it product at the time. A few years later now, there's something much better available. We were not the first to adopt it, but as soon as we realized we were kind of, you know, a technology behind, we did it. I don't think, you know, the best way I can describe it is this. Technology is great, except when it's not. And we all deal with things every day that we say, like, why is this always like this? But we go back and we use it again the next day. And I don't think the CCRs ignored it, and I don't think we ignored it, but I think we struggled with it, and it wasn't a perfect technology. But anybody that's there in the operation and the CCRs are all over, they knew it wasn't perfect. I mean, everybody saw what happened.
Okay. Questions from anybody else on the board?
I have one more.
I'd like to just add one thing to that, too, because what I started out with is once we got this spat of problems in the spring and summer, we did kind of what you're doing. We said, okay, let's figure out what everything's going on. In looking at the scanner problem, it's hard to figure out exactly, because if a guards, at least my estimation, guards would say, I didn't scan because the battery was dead. Now, we don't know that the battery was dead or not, or the person didn't scan it and have that as an excuse. So it was after looking at it very carefully, we concluded it's a global problem. We approach it globally. And we did this not lightly. We spent a lot of money on it. We came and met with staff and got their input and help from the staff, and we went back and we wrote up a plan. We took it to the audit committee, discussed it at the audit committee, came back, found the technology that seemed to be the best in the state, bought that technology, spent money on training people, everything, to try to put a spike through this thing forever. So I want to give the impression, or I want to convey the impression of how seriously we took it, how much time and effort we put into it, and how we think we've got this problem over for now until new technology comes in, some genius comes up with a new idea. And by the way, Homeland Security has been involved in the whole 9 yards.
Given all that, I guess I'm not sure if I'm going to ask Mr. Armstrong or I ask Cyrus. Do you, either of you, have a position to give us an opinion about whether or not you think our CCRs have been properly trained in this area?
I think the CCR is a lot further along than anybody realizes. It's the CCRs that always advise me of what's occurring in the casinos and what's the best technology to use. As the underage problem has spiked, I send my attorneys out for compliance conferences. I mean, we've had a recent instance where we thought we had it under control with the new hardwired scanners. We just had one beat a hardwired scanner. Okay, so I'm sending that attorney out. Okay, what's the problem? What kind of upgrades? Where it's looking at? We've had a situation in the past where we've contacted Homeland Security and we've had an internet website shut down. So the CCRs are much more ahead of this than a lot of people realize. They're pretty much on the front line. In the instance, all the instances here, they talk to the security staff. What's the problem? Well, the battery wasn't charged. Well, why don't you have a number of scanners that can be grabbed at any given time that can be charged, that are charged up? So, like John said, John willingly, he came up to Harrisburg. He met with Jim and I. We went through every instance. He had what's the latest and greatest? How can we get our arms around this? Move away from the portable, get to the hardwired. That's what's been working lately. So I don't think that the CCRs were asleep at the wheel. I think these problems were occurring in rapid succession. The goal was to first get our arms around it, bring the casino into compliance, and then bring this before the board after there was a plan of compliance and a plan of moving forward.
Okay,
because while the problem is going on, it's good to say, oh, violation occurred, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, but what's your plan for coming into compliance and how can we help you get into compliance?
Okay, I don't want to beat this thing any further. Greg.
Yeah, I do. Mr. Armstrong, in your investigation, did you talk to the CCRs about this handheld issue and the fact that they were malfunctioning? And was it your impression that they were aware of that?
They were aware of it. It came to light when the shift manager at Sugar House, the security shift manager, spoke with the Casino Compliance Bureau supervisor at Sugar House. And we had just had a compliance conference with Sugar House personnel a few weeks before, and we're told that there was updates done to the scanners and that they were all proper working order. And the shift manager told the supervisor that, well, the ones at that particular location had not been working for several weeks.
Okay, thank you.
I would just like to add too that 2 of the 5 incidents in this were by the casino compliance representatives being proactive.
Yes.
The one they caught on the surveillance, and the other one they caught walking the casino floor.
No, I know that. I'm just trying to understand the shape of this thing.
They're very proactive.
I just have one question. I really didn't until you brought up the Department of Homeland Security, and it piqued my curiosity. How is the Department of Homeland Security involved with this issue?
Well, the concern is if these kids are coming in with very sophisticated IDs, they're faking or tricking pretty sophisticated scanners. Homeland Security should know that, and as Cyrus pointed out, in one case now they've gone to them and they've shut down a website where kids are buying these things. So if kids are buying them, other people are buying them. So that was a concern.
I got you. Thank you for that explanation.
If there's no other questions, I'd ask if someone has a motion.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do. Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Sugar House HSP Gaming, LP, as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm opposed. Motion is adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next matter on the...
I didn't do that properly. I should have asked, is anybody opposed other than me? I assume that's no. Okay.
We forgive you, Mr. Chairman.
Next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and IOC PA LLC This matter will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel Benjamin Farrell.
Oh, I'm sorry. Would the individuals representing IOCPA stand and identify themselves? The court reporter.
Gary Hendricks, Vice President and General Manager. It's Hendricks.
I'm an attorney, but Elizabeth Tranchina, Tranchina.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Yes.
My apologies. Good morning, Chair and members of the board. Benjamin Farrell, Ferrell. The next matter for consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and IOCPA LLC Management Company for Woodlands Fayette LLC. Prior to August 2nd, 2016, a promotional sales manager for Lady Luck Casino was contacted by the general manager for Pleasant Valley Golf Club requesting match play coupons and drink vouchers for the State Senator Pat Stefano 2016 golf outing. Lady Luck has a relationship with the golf club in which it supplies match play coupons and drink vouchers for events held at the golf club. The promotional sales manager agreed to provide match play coupons and drink vouchers for the event. Lady Luck was not a sponsor and made no advertisement of its participation in the event itself. On August 2nd, 2016, the promotional sales manager arrived at the golf club and dropped off 120 match play coupons and 120 drink vouchers with the club's general manager. The match play coupons and drink vouchers were then distributed to each place setting for the dinner that was scheduled as part of the event. The match play coupons were printed and entitled Senator Pat Stefano Outing. An investigation conducted by the Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement determined that 120 match play coupons valued at $3,000 and 120 drink vouchers valued at $690 replaced the table setting for attendees of the event. 8 match play coupons valued at $200 and 11 drink vouchers valued at $690 were later redeemed by event guests at Lady Luck Casino. At the time, IOCPA LLC's internal controls and audit protocol did not require the training education of marketing staff regarding policies designed to prevent violations of Section 1513 of the Act regarding political influence. As such, IOCPA's internal controls and audit protocols were insufficient in preventing potential violations of Section 1513 of the Gaming Act. IOCPA has since submitted updated internal controls to the Bureau of Gaming Operations for review and subsequent approval, which require that the marketing department employees be made aware and signed acknowledgement of Section 1513's political influence prohibitions. Under the terms agreed upon but under the consent agreement, IOCPA LLC would pay a civil penalty of $15,000 as well as a $2,500 investigation fee. We would ask that you approve this consent agreement. We are available for questions.
Any comments from IOC?
We would just like to confirm that the amendment to the internal controls have been submitted to the staff, and we have also implemented additional standard operating procedures to safeguard against any future possible incidents.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and IOCPA LLC Management Company for Woodlands Fayette LLC as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
The next 5 matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed complaints seeking the revocation of 2 gaming permits and 3 non-gaming registrations issued by 2 individuals by the board. Each complaint has been filed with the board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individuals named in each complaint. The individual named in each complaint failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment and properly served the same upon each named individual. Thereby the facts in each complaint are deemed admitted. All Filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. In each instance, we will provide a brief summary of the facts and request the appropriate board action.
The next matter for your consideration is a complaint for revocation of Durga Ray's non-gaming employee registration. On July 2nd, 2016, Mr. Ray took a wallet from a patron and failed to return that wallet to the patron and keeping it for himself. At this time, OEC requests that the board issue an order revoking Mr. Ray's non-gaming employee registration.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Durga Ray's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Glenn Stewart for the Office of Enforcement Counsel, STUART. Next for the board's consideration is the revocation of Justin Flynn's gaming employee permit. Mr. Flynn had most recently been employed as a table games dealer at Hollywood Casino in Grantville, Pennsylvania. In June 2016, Mr. Flynn pled guilty to 1 count of driving under the influence and 1 count of fleeing or attempting to elude police in relation to an incident where Mr. Flynn was driving erratically and dangerously on an interstate highway. As such, the revocation of Justin Flynn's gaming employee permit is now ripe for the board's consideration.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Justin Flynn's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Tamara Haken with Office of Enforcement Counsel, HAKEN. The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the revocation of the gaming employee permit issued to Teresa Vickers. 11 months after her resignation from her position as a cage cashier for Rivers Casino, Ms. Vickers went to Rivers and attempted to enter the main cage area, walked through back of house areas, and used a stun gun on a security officer, resulting in arrest for multiple misdemeanors, including defiant trespass and disorderly conduct. As a result, OEC requests that the gaming employee permit issued to Teresa Vickers be revoked.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Teresa Vickers' gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good afternoon, Dustin Miller on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter today is a request for revocation involving Shayna Martin. Ms. Martin was employed as an EVS attendant at Parks Casino and registered as a non-gaming employee. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed an enforcement complaint on September 28, 2016 to revoke Ms. Martin's non-gaming employee registration after she was convicted of theft and receiving stolen property on April 6, 2016 for stealing money from a customer's purse while working at a local retailer. The Office of Enforcement Counsel would ask the board to consider the revocation of Shayna Martin's non-gaming employee registration at this time.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Shiana Martin's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter today is a request for revocation involving Curtis Palmore. Mr. Palmore was employed as a valet attendant at Valley Forge Casino Resort and registered as a non-gaming employee. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed an enforcement complaint on September 15, 2016 to revoke Mr. Palmore's non-gaming employee registration after Valley Forge employees found a plastic bag containing cocaine residue at the valet pickup area at the casino. Surveillance review found that Mr. Palmore had dropped the bag earlier in the day while working at Valley Forge. Mr. Palmore was charged with simple possession of a controlled substance and possession of drug paraphernalia by Pennsylvania State Police due to the incident. On June 13, 2016, Mr. Palmore pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct and paid a $100 fine plus court costs for the conviction. The Office of Enforcement Counsel would ask the board to consider the revocation of Curtis Palmore's non-gaming employee registration at this time.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Curtis Palmore's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The remaining 16 matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed petitions seeking the involuntary exclusion of individuals whose presence in a licensed facility are inimical to the interests of the Commonwealth or licensed gaming therein. In each instance, the petition for exclusion has been filed with the Board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individual named in the petition. The individual named in each petition failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment in each instance and properly served the same upon each named individual. Thereby, all facts in each petition are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. In each instance, if the board orders a proposed exclusion of each individual, the individual's photo, personal identifiers, and a summary of the inimical conduct will be placed on the board's public website.
The next matter today is a request for placement on the board's excluded persons list involving Yuli's Ricks. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Mr. Ricks on the exclusion list on August 24th, 2016, due to an incident that occurred on April 9th, 2016, whereby Mr. Ricks approached the main cage in Parks Casino and demanded $100,000 from a cage cashier. Mr. Ricks refused to leave Parks Casino after being approached by Parks Casino security personnel, and Mr. Ricks attempted to gain access to the main cage and resisted arrest after Pennsylvania State Police came to the scene. Mr. Ricks was criminally charged for his actions. On December 6, 2016, Mr. Ricks pled guilty to possessing a small amount of marijuana and defiant trespass. Mr. Ricks was sentenced to pay fines and costs related to the prosecution. Based upon the foregoing, the Office of Enforcement Counsel asks that the board place Yuli's Ricks on the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Julius J. Ricks to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good morning again. The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the involuntary exclusion of Teresa Vickers. 11 months after her resignation from her position as a cage cashier for Rivers Casino, Ms. Vickers did enter Rivers, and she attempted to enter the main cage area, walked through the back of house areas, and used a stun gun on a security officer, resulting in an arrest for multiple misdemeanors, including defiant trespass and disorderly conduct. As a result, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Teresa Vickers on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Teresa Vickers to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter for your consideration is a petition to place Christy Bentler onto the board's involuntary exclusion list. On August 17, 2016, Ms. Bentler used a fraudulent driver's license to enter the gaming floor at Presque Isle Downs Casino. At this time, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Christy Bentler on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Christy Bentler to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Ms. Bentler may petition for removal from the list at any time after her 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter for your consideration is a petition to place Wei Lin onto the board's involuntary exclusion list. On August 18, 2016, Mr. Lin used another patron's driver's license in an attempt to enter the gaming floor at Presque Isle Downs Casino while underage. At this time, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Wei Lin on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Wei Lin to the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Lin may petition for removal from the list anytime after his 22nd birthday.
All in favor?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Chairman, Commissioners, the next matter for your consideration is a board order to add Christopher Baker to the board's involuntary exclusion list. On June 15th of 2016, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition seeking to place Mr. Baker on the board's excluded persons list as a result of his conduct while a patron at Sugar House Casino. Mr. Baker was investigated by the state police for allegedly passing counterfeit $100 bills while gambling at 6 different table games at Sugar House Casino. Mr. Baker was arrested and criminally charged with multiple counts of forgery. On September 7th, he pled guilty to 3 counts of forgery, second-degree felonies. As a result of the above conduct, Mr. Baker was permanently evicted from Sugar House Casino. Accordingly, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests the board enter judgment upon default and place Mr. Baker on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Christopher Baker to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. John Crowe, CROHE, for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter for your consideration is a request to place Joseph Murphy on the board's excluded persons list for stealing the cell phone of another patron while gaming at Mohegan Sun. Mr. Murphy pleaded guilty to receiving stolen property, and the Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that the board place Mr. Murphy on the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Joseph Murphy to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next two matters before the board are factually related. Therefore, I ask to read one set of facts and then ask separately for each individual to be placed on the exclusion list. On June 25th, 2016, Jacob Leitner was playing Pai Gow at Mohegan Sun Casino with his sister, Jordan Leitner, standing behind him. Jacob Leitner left the table as Jordan Leitner argued with another patron at the table, then struck him in the face. Jacob Leitner returned to the table, also argued with the same patron, and then struck him several times in the face. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now asks that the board place Jacob Leitner on the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Jacob Leitner to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
And the Office of Enforcement Counsel also now requests that the board place Jordan Leitner on the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Jordan Leitner to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next is a request to place Jeffrey Cruz on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Cruz was on the gaming floor at Sands Casino while in possession of cocaine. Mr. Cruz was charged by the Pennsylvania State Police under the Drug Act with possession of a controlled substance, and the charge remains pending. The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Jeffrey Cruz on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Jeffrey Cruz to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next is a request to place Jody Lynn Bear on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Bear, age 20, gained access to the gaming floor at Sands Casino and gained for approximately 3 hours and 25 minutes at 22 separate slot machines. Mr. Bear was permanently evicted by Sands Security and was charged by the Pennsylvania State Police with a minor on the gaming floor. He has pled guilty to that charge, and the matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Jody Lynn Bear on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Jody Lynn Bear to the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board involuntary exclusion list for a period of at least 1 year, after which he may petition to be removed from the list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next is a request to place Miguel Reynoso on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Reynoso passed multiple counterfeit $100 bills at several gaming tables while gaming at Sands Casino. The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Miguel Reynoso on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Miguel A. Reynoso to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the board. David Tepper, T-E-P-P-E-R, with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter on the board's agenda is to consider the placement of Alyssa Gill on the involuntary exclusion list. In August 2016, Ms. Gill used a false identification card while underage in an attempt to gain access to the gaming floor at Mount Airy Casino. She was subsequently cited by the Pennsylvania State Police and pled guilty, and at this time the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that Alyssa Gill be placed on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Alyssa Gill to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Ms. Gill may petition for removal from the list any time after her 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next on the board's agenda is a petition to place Christopher Lamberto on the board's involuntary exclusion list. In July 2016, Christopher Lamberto attempted to use a false identification card while underage to gain access to the gaming floor at Mount Airy Casino. He was subsequently cited by the Pennsylvania State Police and pled guilty. And at this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board add Mr. Lamberto to the board's involuntary exclusion list.
I believe Mr. Tepper's a little anxious to get out of here.
Yeah, I know. I noticed that, but we'll proceed and we'll circle back. This is the Lamberto matter.
Right.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Christopher Lamberto to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Lamberto may petition for removal from the list anytime after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Now, I believe we skipped over a matter involving Peter Farina.
My apologies.
No problem.
In July 2016,
You're just trying to see if we're paying attention.
exactly,
We do.
Peter Farina aided and abetted Christopher Lamberto in an attempt to gain access to the gaming floor at Mount Airy Casino. Mr. Farina was subsequently cited by the Pennsylvania State Police and pled guilty. And at this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that Peter Farina be added to the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Peter Farina to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Farina may petition for removal from the list after 1 year.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next on the board's agenda is a petition to place Matthew Leonard on the board's involuntary exclusion list. In August 2016, Mr. Leonard attempted to use the identification card of another in an attempt to gain access to Mount Airy Casino while he was underage. He was subsequently cited by the Pennsylvania State Police and pled guilty. And at this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board add Matthew Leonard to the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Matthew Leonard to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Leonard may petition for removal from the list after 1 year.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter is a petition to place John Rathbone on the board's involuntary exclusion list. In August 2016, Mr. Rathbone aided and abetted Matthew Leonard, who was 20 years old at the time, in an attempt to gain access to the gaming floor at Mount Airy Casino. Mr. Rathbone was cited by the Pennsylvania Police and subsequently pled guilty. And at this time, OEC asks that John Rathbone be placed on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of John Rathbone to the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Rathbone may petition for removal from the list after 1 year.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Thank you. That concludes our business.
Thank you very much, Cyrus. That concludes today's public session. Our next scheduled meeting will be held on Wednesday, February 1st. The meeting will begin at 10 a.m. in this room. Are there any other final questions or comments from the board or ex officio members at this time? If not, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to adjourn this distinguished panel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you all.